handout. Let me know if you need it posted again. Somebody will do that, or I will do that. My name is Jessica, or Zahra. I am going to talk about inclusivity for event stewards, or for anyone who's really helping with planning an event, a practice, a meeting. We're gonna kind of just cover general inclusivity as it relates to SCA planning. I am the SCA DEI officer. My SCA name is Zahra. I am happy to answer questions about that if you want to email me. If you're curious about what the office looks like, it's pretty new. Happy to talk about it. My personal background is in public policy, rhetoric, and writing for nonprofits. I currently work in corporate documentation, which is as thrilling as it sounds. So this is something that I've pursued as far as diversity initiatives at pretty much all levels of my modern life and my social life, I suppose. So this is about making the SCA a space where people feel like they belong, regardless of their social group and identity, and where they all have equal access to opportunities and can be treated with courtesy, dignity, and respect, no matter how they're different. We want this space to be a fun, safe place for everyone, but we can't pretend like we exist in a perfect utopia modernly. So that means we need to work really hard to promote values of equity and inclusion in everything we do. Again, there is a handout linked in the Facebook event. I can link it in chat if people need it. If you need a large text handout, let me know here or email me and I will make sure you can get that. A good portion of the information on accessibility issues is due to long chats I have had with Lady Elizabeth Fisher, who's right in this group with us. Her email is on the handout at the top. Definitely reach out to her. She has all kinds of invaluable information. She is a great resource for accessibility issues in the SCA. So let's get down to the class. A very large part of what we'll be doing is learning how to work with what we have and not sugarcoating what we can offer to people in terms of our events. I understand that a lot of us don't have perfect sites that are easily accessible to public transport and equipped with every possible assistive device. But this isn't about perfection. When you're looking for a new site, maybe you can allow some of the information to guide your choices. But mostly, this is about being able to identify and assess what the sites you do have offer, and then being able to clearly communicate on those issues. People will rely on the information that you provide about your site and your event. We want to be transparent about the information so that people can make decisions for themselves and their comfort. We empower them to make their own choices, and we make sure that the answers they need are easy to get, comprehensive, and that they don't need to go on some wild spree to find the answers. So I want to start by reminding everyone to keep in mind the idea of privilege, or advantage, if you will. I talk about the concept of privilege more in another one of my courses, but we can look at this a little bit more narrowly and still understand it here. So think about what you consider when you're deciding whether or not to attend an event or a practice or a meeting. I think about things like, oh, does this sound interesting? Is this something that has activities I want to do? Are my friends going to be there? I think about those kinds of things. But let's think about more logistics. Basic logistics seem a little obvious, right? What day of the week is this? Do I have to work? Maybe I have to arrange childcare for certain days of the week and not others. How about how long the event is? If it's just a day trip, maybe I don't need to board my pets, but if it's a weekend, can't leave a dog alone for that long. And then you've got the distance. Are we day tripping? Are we hoteling? But how many of you are concerned about something like how wide the doorways are? How many of you are concerned about whether or not the feast or the lunch has a gluten-free option? How many of you think about what the town's history says when it comes to welcoming people that look like you? These are things that might guide other people's choices that may have never occurred to you, right? Socioeconomic status, disability, even race may factor into a person's choice to attend or skip an event. They will be making assessments for their own enjoyment, health, and safety based on information that might not have occurred to you to provide. So we're going to try to learn to be a little bit more conscious about some of these options. Even more so than some of my other classes, this is really a living document sort of class. It's going to keep growing and changing as I take suggestions and get feedback and keep adding into this to make it as robust as I can. So to that point, I really want to emphasize perfection is not the goal. We're going to talk about a ton of ideas. And if you implement just one, you've accomplished more than if you've done nothing. I have no expectation that every event can use every idea. It would be totally impossible. I really recommend thinking about what applies most for your community and what will bring people safety in your community. That's a really good starting point to take this information and then apply it practically. So to really get into it, let's model as though we're creating an event. So let's start with what an initial site search might look like. So what's our event, right? Not every event encompasses every activity. So what we need is going to be a little bit different. I probably don't need a shower for ANS night unless we're getting real messy, but a fighting event, maybe that's the gift that we give ourselves, right? Make sure you have a shower. So you want to find facilities that work for what you're doing. Ideally, those facilities are as disability friendly, or for those of you in the US, ADA compliant as possible, but it's not a perfect world. And we'll talk more about evaluating what your site can offer in a minute. Public transit, especially in metropolitan areas, is sometimes the only means by which people can travel. Cars can be prohibitively expensive and not everyone can drive. You don't want to leave behind your gaggle of college students or your city folks or your visually impaired if you can help it. So make a mental note of where public transit is related to your site, if possible. I also want to talk about location a little in terms of safety for your attendees. And we're going to get a little serious here. So I'm sorry, but it's important. So how many of you have heard of the term sundown town? So in the US, a sundown town or a sunset town or a gray town was historically an area that practiced segregation by enforcing restrictions that excluded non-whites. So this could be a combination of violence or intimidation, but it was often written into local laws and statutes. The name itself is awful, and it comes from signs that were posted on the entrance, like the borders of towns, that would explicitly say, N-word, don't let the sun go down on you in town name. Awful. Very, very bad. And yeah, the sentiments for many of these were anti-Black, but they certainly did not restrict themselves to only discriminating against Black folks. Many towns enforced restrictions against Blacks, Jews, those of Asian descent. What this really was a way to codify and normalize racism into the makeup of a town. So what did that look like, right? I, as a person of color, would not be allowed to buy housing in such a town. If the law didn't explicitly disallow it, realtors would just ignore me when I tried to look for space. If I had children that I wanted to enroll into schools in these towns, that wouldn't be allowed. Possibly most terrifying, if I stayed in the town past the dreaded sundown marker and began experiencing hostility from the residents, I could expect local law enforcement to just look the other way. And let me be really clear, this was recent. There are people who enforce these laws who are not yet 50 because these laws were still on the books as recently as the 70s. And I don't have to tell you that this kind of culture in an area can persist for a long time afterwards. We have community pamphlets that have towns boasting of their no Negro population, and they link this to public health and safety. It is really bad. It is scary stuff, and we don't like to talk about it a lot. So I could do a whole class on that, but it's not this one. The point that I'm trying to make is I really want to reinforce the idea. People are making evaluations for their own safety and happiness in event attendance. And if we want to be inclusive, we need to try to be aware of what some of those things that they're concerned about are. We want to identify where our pitfalls are so that we can hang a lantern over them and keep our populace informed. So that's a lot. I know it's really like heavy. Are there any questions at this point? If not, we'll just keep on going to the next section.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes. So how do I, as a fairly straightforward white woman, find out some of these information, that background? Because I know some places kind of hide that stuff. You're talking about some of them still have it like out in the open. But what if it's not out in the open? How do I go about finding that information if it's a new area to me?
So quick research will usually give you some of the info. We had an event in this kingdom where if you had just Googled the town's name, it's in the history on Wikipedia.
Oh, geez,
so
okay.
There is some information out there. Sometimes it's a little harder and you kind of need to ask around in that area. Generally speaking, there are resources put together by people of color that will talk about the safety of certain towns. Are you familiar with the term Green Book?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is something that people of color, primarily Black people, but people of color used to put together very commonly while traveling to point out what was safe and what wasn't. And you can still find a lot of the information that was shared in these books online in different areas, especially if they're a town that is still kind of shaking off what that looked like for them 50 years ago.
Okay.
So that's a good starting point.
Cool, thanks.
Are there any other questions, thoughts, opinions, concerns? Okay. All right, that was pretty heavy. That's probably the heaviest thing I got. We're not gonna stay there. So let's move on to the next section. And this is where we're gonna really get into the stuff I have on the handout. So we'll just talk about the different aspects, just like we're doing a walkthrough of a site. I'll keep asking questions because the answers to those questions are gonna vary depending on the site that you're kind of mentally evaluating, I guess. So we're going to a site, doing a walkthrough. We've arrived. Where are we going to park? Parking can be really, really difficult because you don't generally have a lot of control over what that looks like. You'll want to note for people the proximity to the event itself, how wide those parking spaces are, whether or not they're clearly marked, and whether there are specifically wider accessible parking spots already in place, or whether you need to create your own. If you do need to create your own, make sure that they're clearly marked, that people are not misusing them on the day of. Make sure those spots are not only closer, but potentially larger as well to account for ramps or other devices. Try not to let folks block these spaces. I know that seems really obvious and like it shouldn't need to be said, but people still do it. It is actively illegal. They should not. You should not let them. So, accessible spaces. It is possible that you will have venues that are just like street parking, or that your parking will be very far from the actual gate and your event itself. So if you have that, a good plan is to include an unloading area where people can kind of pull up, drop their stuff in a safe spot, park, come back. Another option is a shuttle. It doesn't have to be a formal shuttle. It can just be someone volunteering with their personal vehicle to make trips at a certain time. Anything really helps. It'll be the difference for some people about whether they can get to an event or not. Some people will not have the bandwidth to be able to park 4 or 5 blocks away and then carry all of their stuff back to site. So being mindful of that is really helpful. So terrain, right? Terrain is not something that I think a lot of people give a lot of consideration if they are able-bodied. But for some folks, problematic terrain prevents usage of mobility devices, or it creates obstacles to attending certain activities. If you've got something located at the top of a hill, and I need to get to the top of that hill after being all the way on the other side of site, I don't know that I'm going to the top of the hill. That's just how it works. Be mindful of the type of floor you're dealing with, right? Is it gravel? Is it grass? Is it asphalt? Is it sand? God, I hope it's not sand. Is it some hellish combination of all of the above? People need to know that, right? If I'm going to be restricted to one section of the event, I want to know that before I get here. And I'm like, I'm not going into the sand zone. So here we are, right? If you have a shuttle or golf carts, be mindful of where those stops are located and make sure that the schedule is available if there is one. You don't want people planning around a shuttle that won't align with anything they want to do. Seating is also really good. A lot of the times people using the shuttle would have kids, or they'll be carrying stuff, or they'll need to sit and take the break. So having seating at shuttle stops and also along long walkways is really useful. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. There's been a couple events who have employed some of these strategies out in Ontario and in other places, and we'll circle back at that point. Another note on the golf carts and shuttles, if there is a certain platform that will account for certain mobility devices, if there's a crazy weight limit that's either super low or high enough to allow for more people and more assistive devices, make a note of that. It's not super useful to have a shuttle that no one can functionally use. So that's good to make a note of. Let's say we're indoors, and then we need to talk about stairs. Are there multiple flights? Are they mandatory to get to certain aspects of the event that are important, like court or bathrooms? Are they particularly steep? Is there a railing? What about other obstacles? Narrow hallways, narrow doorways, bad lighting. These are all things to kind of keep in mind as you're doing your site walkthrough. Elevators. Elevators can be tricky because some elevators require a key. If finding and using that elevator means I have to go find one person on the site who is also working and running around, and then bring them over to the elevator to use it every time, that's not super useful. But there's ways around that, right? Sometimes the site can unlock the elevator and put it into manual usage. Sometimes you can just build elevator attendants into your event staff and just account for having someone around or on hand to make sure that people can use the elevator as they need. Maps of site, even if they're really crudely drawn, which would be anything that I do, are super useful because that will give folks an approximate idea of where activities are. If someone who wants to do both archery and a class in the main building needs to leave early to get to both, a map can help so that they don't get to 5 minutes before and then have to do some mad dash across the site. Signage helps a lot. If you're someone with limited movement or energy, the last thing you want to do is trek across the entirety of site only to learn that whatever you wanted to do was way back where you came from. That's awful. Don't make people do that. People with children need to account for where the children's activities are in regard to everything else. Parents need to stay inside of their kids. If you put your children's activities way, way out, it's possible that people will be less willing to bring children, knowing that they need to keep themselves separated for the entirety of the event. So let's talk a little bit about camping spaces. Not all events have camping, but should your event have camping, I want to talk about one of the most common pitfalls we really see. Something that a lot of folks like to do is put all the period tents right up front, right? And all of the modern tents go in the back. And I get it, right? Ambiance. We love it. It's beautiful. I like it. I love being able to see a good period setup. I am totally in favor of having a section of your event that has period setups in a highly visible place. Right on. But please also keep in mind, many folks choose to use modern tents for accessibility and transportation concerns. Small vehicles can't always handle some kind of crazy setup. If you find me a person who can cram an oval marquee into their Prius, let me know. I will add them to this class. We can totally incorporate that. Also, I am 5'2", which means I will not be putting up most period tents by myself. Other folks need to account for various electrical devices like CPAP machines and the like. Make an accessible camping area. Make it not located in the South Pole. Provide electrical access if you have it. Make sure it's near restroom facilities and parking if at all possible. Let folks know if they'll be able to just drive up and set up their stuff and drive away, or if they have to schlep. And if they have to schlep, make sure that you've got a crew of people that might be able to help them. That's a great way for a household or a set of champions to really get involved and help out. And again, this could be the difference between whether or not someone can come to your event or not. It's something to keep in mind. So, restrooms, very important. Note the locations clearly. Make sure people aren't running around in a time of great angst trying to find a bathroom. If there are accessible stalls, evaluate whether or not these stalls are truly accessible. Again, Lady Elizabeth and I had a great conversation, and she had told me that many folks have no choice but to use stalls with the door open because their stall is not wide enough to allow for their devices. Don't make people do this. Don't subject people to this kind of indignity because you did not take a look first. Check the space. If it looks tight, maybe include measurements on the website. Note the height of the sinks. How high are they? Can someone in a mobility device that's lower still reach a higher sink? What if it's set back? Can I get back into it? These are all things to keep in mind. If there are showers, note. Also note if there are accessibility concerns. Shower trailers don't always have ramps. Sometimes they just have stairs. People will not be able to get into it. Accessible porta potties can be available and located in a central area. Do not have these face a busy road. Another fun story we talked about. Do not put people into the position of playing Frogger when they have to pee. Not good. Make sure they face a way where they can safely get in and out without having to, dodge trucks. Not fun. Furthermore, gender inclusive facilities are important. If possible, label these with neutral signage. I have some examples on my handout. This is good for not only folks who are outside of the gender binary, but also for people with differently gendered aides or children. It just makes things easier for everyone. If your site doesn't have neutral bathrooms, it's really easy to just label one yourself, right? Pick one, slap a label on it. Some folks also like to include hygiene products in bathrooms. Again, be mindful that these products should be in all bathrooms because their usage is not going to be restricted to just outdated notions of gender. Just really make things easy for people. Make things so that everyone has equal accommodation. So this is actually a really good segue because one of the pitfalls of having those larger stalls is that people love to use them to change. And if you're in there changing into your Cotardie that has 80 buttons down the front and someone else comes in who needs to use that specific stall, not great. So changing rooms are a unique space that can be offered that will prevent people from unnecessarily occupying these stalls. Again, another space that's really good to have a gender neutral area in for comfort. You can use curtains, you can use dividers. Chairs are great to have in these spaces. I have hopped around trying to buckle period shoes and whatnot without a chair, but it's not cute. You don't want to see it. put some chairs in. Quiet or low sensory spaces are also great. And those can serve a multitude of folks. So parents who are breastfeeding, people who need a space for prayer or meditation, people who might be overly stimulated and need a little bit of an escape from loud noises. Those rooms can be stocked with items for comfort like pillows or blankets, small snacks, water. They're just a really good kind of escape for people. Also, please be aware of areas of rescue assistance or areas of refuge that might be located in your site. These are areas that are checked by first responders in case of emergency. If you are someone who normally needs an elevator but wouldn't have access to one in, say, a fire, you would go to these areas to await assistance or destruction. It is very clear why we would want to know what those areas are as event stewards or as people working events. So I'm going to talk about just this last bit of populous and gathering spaces, gathering and populous spaces, and I'm going to break for questions because I can't read chat and also do this. So we'll circle. So populous and gathering spaces, let folks know the size of day camp that is allowable to maintain manageable walkways. Make sure you are looking at these walkways throughout the day, keeping them clear. Be mindful of merchant areas and food areas especially, because these can become densely populated during peak times. They might seem fine when everything is quiet, but as soon as lunch hits, if no one can move, you've got a problem. If people need to bring their own chairs, let them know. If you have chairs available, but those chairs are not good for long-term comfort, like stools or backless chairs, or if they have really strict weight limits, let people know so that they can bring their own chairs. Again, circling back to children's activities, be mindful of the location. We don't want our kids running around right next to the archery range or right next to the list field. But we also want to ensure consistent sight lines to the parents. So if we keep children's activities in a central space to keep parents connected to both their children and to everyone else, we've allowed for people to bring their kids more comfortably. We need motivation for people to want to come with their children, and it doesn't help to keep them isolated. So we want everyone in the heart of the action. We want the kids to be safe. Be mindful of that when you're laying out your event. So let's talk questions, if anyone has any, and I will quickly look at chat. Male restrooms have changing stations. Yes, very notable. Everyone needs changing stations. We are all changing. There's no reason not to have some kind of inclusive space for it. Porta potties not set up too close together. Very true. Obviously, if you have to squeeze through yourself, people with assistive devices are probably not going to be able to effectively do so. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or general contributions on what we've gone through so far?
I have one note for you.
Yes.
Parking.
Yes.
This has actually come up for me here. I say recently, but I haven't been to an event in 4 months. When you're assessing where the accessible parking is, check to see if there are ramps up to the main sidewalk in that area as well, because that sometimes is not a given.
Very good note. Ramps up to main sidewalk. Excellent. Summer events, be conscious of having areas people can go to cool off. Yes, it would be very good to set up a pop-up with some water, a good seating area, populous space. I mean, we are wearing a lot. A lot of people are wearing a lot of layers, and it's paperwork for you if they fall over. So keep them hydrated and upright. Perfect. Okay. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, we'll just keep it rolling. Okay. So we've done our general site walkthrough. I want to talk a little bit about specific aspects of an event. So gate, right? Gate is the first place most folks will see. It is important that gate is enough space for people to congregate, because there will be lines. People will need to be there all at once. It will be tight. It's also an informational area. So set up your gate staff for success by giving them the information that they need to direct people to the various activities. There are too many times where I have worked gate and had no idea what was going on, or been sent to gate only to be told they have no idea what is going on. Gate is also frequently in hallways. Like I said, small spaces. This can really affect folks with mobility devices. Include seats for people who maybe can't stand for the 15 minutes it can sometimes take to get through. Include pre-registration. That'll speed things up. That'll cut back on traffic. Portable paperwork was one of the notes. Again, I spoke with Lady Elizabeth about having things on clipboards so that people can take things and fill them out without necessarily having to bend over a table or stand for long periods of time. A map. It can be, like I said, very crudely drawn, but if it's located at gate, people can do an initial evaluation. If you're using walkie-talkies, keep them at gate. It's part of keeping your staff informed. If you're using a messenger group, make sure someone at gate is in it. Keep them looped in. Schedules change, locations change, classes cancel. People need to know. So make sure that if you've got some kind of informational point set up there, they have the information for people. Large print site booklets are great to have on hand. Make sure folks know that those are an option if you have them. Let them know verbally in case you put out a sign in too small of a print for them to know. If you can't manage to have a bunch of large print site booklets, just keep one at gate so that people can come and they can look at it and it can just live there for you. I want to talk about newcomers. Newcomers are our bread and butter, right? We want to make everyone feel welcome, but what we do can be tremendously overwhelming. So offering something like a newcomer's point or a similar area or program where folks can go to ask questions and to learn more about the SCA is great. You're going to want this area to be readily visible from gate. You're going to want to make sure that you're staffing it with people that are friendly and knowledgeable. At larger events, you can think about expanding this to almost include sort of individual ambassadors for each different activity, right? So if I go to an event and it's a huge event, right? And I have no idea, but I know I like archery. It's not always likely that whoever you pick to staff Newcomers Point would have a ton of information about it. But if they have a specific contact, if they can say, yup, I'm going to text our archery person, they're going to walk you through what this looks like for us, that's a good call. That'll really welcome people in. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the website, but make these people and ambassadors available prior to the event so that if people have questions, they can reach out without necessarily being put on the spot. For a lot of people, it can be really overwhelming once they're actually there. They might not necessarily be able to, like, on the spot tell you what their concerns are. If you give them a chance to reach out in advance for an event, they can voice their concerns and questions ahead of time. And be realistic about who we are and what we can offer folks. We are trying to be more inclusive, but we need to not sugarcoat where we are right now. I've had a couple different groups come and talk to me about whether they should include bilingual pamphlets at like a demo or at information point. And at first glance, this really does seem like a good idea, right? But is that reflective of your local group? Can someone pick up your bilingual pamphlet and then attend an event or a practice and see that multiculturalism reflected there? If so, that's awesome. Great, do it. But if not, You're advertising something that you can't follow through on. You don't want people to feel like they've been misled. Be careful. Make sure you're not sugarcoating things for people. Gold key. I mean, quite obviously, we are all varying sizes. Make sure your gold key reflects that. Have it be robust. We call it gold key. I guess I should really call it loaner garb because I'm not sure if that is something that is universally used. But loaner garb needs to encompass a variety of sizes. And in an ideal world, a variety of persona locations and time periods. It's possible sometimes for loaner garb to fall into disrepair or to just kind of be cast-offs that are donated, but it's to your benefit to maintain one that's full of clothes that people really want to wear and that they feel confident and comfortable and attractive in. I know that I love my garb because it's flattering to my body. And I'm just going to be honest, I feel like looking good is a huge part of the SCA for a lot of people. If you can draw people in on that premise at their very first event, you're on the right track. Feast gear. A loaner feast gear that lives at Newcomer's Point, even if it's disposable. That's great. People will show up at an event and they won't know necessarily that you have to bring your own feast gear. If they've already purchased a ticket, make sure that they can have something that they can use and don't leave the burden on the group that's holding the feast, because not all of them can absorb several people suddenly needing to use plates and bowls and cups. Another note, ask discreetly. It can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, the amount of information of who we are and what we offer for people. So asking discreetly if people need a set of feast gear is a little bit better than just like putting them on the spot. And on that note, you can keep basics on what to expect during ceremonies and courts and everything else, right? We are a society of traditions, and it takes months to really learn everything. At my second event, I went with a friend who was sitting in court with me, and we were watching a knighting, and halfway through, she leaned over and said, "Hey, just so you know, he's gonna slap the crap out of him in 2 seconds." And I went, "What?" And then watched him slap the crap out of him in 2 seconds. And I was like, oh. And it was something that really surprised me. So there are a lot of traditions that are maybe not what we expect. It's good to have that information available for people so they can be prepared if they want. But something I do want to kind of remind you, we have all of these titles and all of these modes of address and all of these sumptuary laws and all of these authorizations. And if you just grab the next newcomer you see and are like, they're going to freak out. So don't do that. Have the information there, but you don't need to give them this deluge of terms and rules, and they're just trying to figure out how to have fun with us. So be gentle. There's a line. Try to walk it. Keep the information available, but don't just like overwhelm people. I promise. It's scary. They'll run. You don't want that. So I'm currently working with our society chatelaine. She's also here in the middle. And we're creating a class that's specifically geared towards inclusivity around recruitment and retention for chatelaines. We'll talk more about the nuances of some of these concepts there. If you're interested, you can email me. I will make sure that you know about it when it finally comes out. I want to touch really quickly on something that is not on this sheet that I probably should, but I am not because I have a separate class about it. So service animals. We are developing a class on service animals and just general information. It's going to be general knowledge and some US specific information about abiding by the ADA. Short version of that, we follow all laws and ordinances, and that generally means you must allow service animals. You may not demand documentation. You may not require pre-registration. You may not charge people more. You are limited by the ADA in the US as to what questions you are allowed to ask the handler of service animals. I want you to be mindful that, especially in the US, a service animal is considered medical equipment. So it's not about the rights of the animal, it's about the rights of the handler. Like I said, we'll have a short class available on that. It'll probably be about 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll talk about things like service animals versus emotional support animals, the accountability and responsibility when it comes to service animals, and lawful interactions with the handlers of service animals. So again, if you are interested, email me. I will add you to that kind of running interest list, and you will see that class advertised when I finish it. So I'll pause really quick. Does anyone have questions? Are we good? Are we together? Okay, so it seems like we're all on the same page. I'm gonna move on. All right, so website. Leading up to the event, your website is a great platform for disseminating information and managing expectations. Please keep in mind, if you do like a Facebook event and a website or some other kind of social media, everything needs to be updated. So don't just update one and forget to update the other, because then you'll have completely different information and people will be very confused. I'm a really big fan of social media, and now many of us have social media officers. So you can loop them in to help you give people info and generate buzz for your event. I would put your accessibility info somewhere on your site. I really recommend that for larger events, you consider getting an accessibility officer or some kind of staff member specifically working on accessibility who can do a site walkthrough or get the information from the site walkthrough, and they can take questions from folks ahead of time, etc. It's just really useful. I've included some of the information that might be able to be included on the handout. Again, it's kind of things we talked about: bathroom, shower availability, general site layout, access to public transit, if that's applicable. Just general information that would be useful for helping folks plan out their event. We're just trying to learn how to incorporate these ideas into every mindset for site evaluation. So for websites, type everything out. Images should have the alt text included, because folks using text-to-voice programs, will not be able to read that embedded text. If you can hover over an image and then a little pop-up comes up with text, you're doing it right. If you have a list of rules on a graphic, make sure those are also written out somewhere so that people can see them. Font choice and color. We all know that some fonts are much more readable than others. I love a good, pretty medieval font as much as the next person, but keep those stylistic choices in mind when we're trying to make sure people can actually read what we're saying. It's important. Color choices. Here in the middle, we have red and green. If you put red text on a green background, or even worse, green text on a red background, people will be really, really not happy with you. Try not to do that. It's real hard to read. So just be aware, your lime green text should not go on your bright crimson background. Look at the choices you're making. Look at them on multiple different mediums. Check your phone, check your computer. Things do not show up the same. Make sure that people using different devices can all see the information that you are trying to put out. For language, choose your language carefully. It's really easy to just use an opening like "Good Gentles all" or "Nobility of our kingdom," instead of something a little bit more exclusive like "Lords and ladies." Little choices like this can make a gathering more inclusive and more comfortable for everyone there. Another thing to put on your website, potentially, carpooling and crash space. I found it very difficult to afford the SCA when I first got involved. It took a long time before I established the contacts to just be like, oh, this is in this part of Indiana. I'm going to call so-and-so and see if I can crash on their couch. New people will not have this at all. People who are restricted to one local area more will not have this for other areas. If you can put some kind of system in place for people to reach out and potentially get help with this, you will widen the viability of attendance for so many people. Sometimes it's good to just have a coordinator for that, just built into your staff. Someone who people can reach out to and say, like, hey, these are my needs. Does anyone have any crash space that I can use? It can be expensive. I think we all know that. One of the cheaper ways we have done things in the past is offering crash space and doing carpooling, but that's kind of fallen out of vogue. And I'm all for bringing things back. So let's do it. Not all things. The 90s and like hipster pants, they can stay where they are. We're not going to talk about that. So moving on. Websites. Websites are good. Let's talk about court. Something my kingdom has been doing for the last couple reigns is putting out a court summons. They just list the names. They don't tell you what you're getting. They just list the names of the people they'd like to see in court. Sometimes it's not even for awards. Sometimes it's just because they want to talk about something cool that the person did. It's good. It gives people who have some level of anxiety about court the benefit of not having to deal with this weird surprise. It also cuts down on people missing their own awards. We hear the, or someone to accept for them much less now than we used to. It's really beneficial for people. So court summons are an option. If you're not going to be that kind of general with it, people still have preferences. People have preferences as far as being summoned in court. People have preferences as far as titles and pronouns. It's nice to have a medium where they can keep those. Also keep in mind, some persona pronouns may not match modern ones. So I know a few kingdoms have wikis. The DEI officer down in Antigora checked in with the person who organizes his wiki and was able to set up a area where people could put personal preferences as far as court goes. This is a really good starting point for you. If you're gonna write someone in for an award, or if you're creating a scroll for them, or even if you're just a herald who wants to be a little bit more informed, this is a good repository for people to put individual preferences so that we can tailor their court experiences for their comfort. Reserved seating is good. People should be able to go to Troll and say, or I should call it Gate. People should be able to go to Gate and say, hey, I need to be closer in order to hear effectively, or I need to be closer because of this. Or conversely, I want to be further back because I know my children are going to be a little bit rambunctious, or I'm going to need to step out halfway through. It's okay to set aside a little bit of seating for people who have special interests as far as enjoying court goes. Do a quick walk around the area for court. People are going to need to get up from where they are and get to the front. And if you've got, I don't know, a muddy field or dips in the ground or a million other things that might cause people some problems in trying to do that, you should adjust accordingly. So check that out before it starts. Also, another thing is we have silent heralds in the SCA. Many kingdoms have a kingdom level 1. There is an SCA level silent herald who you can email. I think I put the contact info on the handout for that. These sign heralds will need to be visible to do their jobs. Keep this in mind when you're laying out your court. Another note is that right now in the SCA virtual classroom, there is a sign herald weekly gathering where anyone can go and you can learn some sign that's a little bit more specific to the SCA. Super cool. Really recommend it. And then I know my Baroness Hillary, wanted to talk a little bit on scrolls. So I'm going to let her say a few words if she's here. Yes.
I am. Thank you. I was kind of double dutying it, so thank you for letting me stop in at the end.
Of course.
Hi everybody. I've been doing Scribble, doing scrolls. I'm a scribe for quite a while, and I've challenged myself lately to show inclusivity in the scrolls themselves. So when I'm doing a scroll that might have a picture of a bunch of people together, whether that's people playing games because the person getting the scroll is achieving an award because they run games tents, or people that are fighting, or people that are on an archery line, and I'm doing like a bunch of people, just sort of random, drawing whatever. One of the things that I'm trying to do on purpose is show diversity within those paintings, within those drawings, so that there are people of color and there are people of, it's not just European garb, and there's people, maybe I've got like on an archery line somebody in a wheelchair, or I have on in a gaming tent, or even fighting, because we do have fighters with physical challenges. So there's make sure that there's women included in all of the martial activities. Make sure that maybe there's somebody who's using oh my gosh, I'm going to embarrass myself. I don't know what they're called. Help me out, Elizabeth. Like not a walker, but because there's medieval versions of those where some sort of assisted device. Maybe somebody has a seeing eye dog, so that it's showing that it's not just, the SCA is not just Wonderlight White Indo-European or European. People, the more those scrolls are out there, the more people see that we are inclusive, that they can be a part, and that it's normal, the better. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And yes, I mean, we should be reflective of inclusivity across as many facets of who we are as we can manage. I think it's great. I'm going to pause. We're almost done. We've got 2 more things to talk about. Does anyone have questions, comments, concerns?
You were talking about feast gear at one point for newcomers.
Yes.
Something else you can do on a personal level. Like I totally agree with you. We have like a set for the group to use. Something I kind of let everybody else in my group know is that I always have extra feast gear myself. And that can be a great icebreaker for somebody new, because now you can say, hey, why don't you come and sit with me at feast? I'll let you borrow my feast gear. I'll walk you through it. Suddenly they've got a friend and they don't feel alone.
Yes. Yes, I love that. If I remember my feast gear, which I do with semi-regularity, we also have extras in our kit, but usually I'm the one who's like, can I borrow a plate? Because I've forgotten my feast gear again. Sorry.
Yeah, but I know that for us, in my barony, we tend to have a pattern to our newcomers, because we have one huge demo where we see thousands of people. So we tend to do a collection of feast gear. And then not too long after that, it's just, hey, we have new feast gear setups for our new people. And the chatelaine will actually take charge of distributing whatever we have. And it's also an opportunity to say, hey, we were able to get you a plate and a bowl. Here's what else you'll need. So it's kind of educational and sharing with them at the same time.
Yes, love that. And chatelaines are a great system for distributing this. God. All right, we have a hand up. Yes.
I just wanted to say, somehow my husband and I always seem to end up with a new person with our group. So I've started packing some, we found some palm leaf biodegradable plates that I tend to always pack extras of for a new person, because then they don't have to feel like they have to keep it, but we have something, and it doesn't feel quite so wasteful as a plastic plate, and it looks a little more period sometimes.
Yes, those are awesome. You can buy those on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
They're great to have on hand. They look super cool. I've seen them used at like vigils and stuff.
We had them for our wedding, so we have extras still.
We
Love
have a
it.
ton of them still.
They're really cool. I really like those. And they have not only the plates, but they also have like bowls and silverware too. It's super cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you can give someone a whole set and you don't have to worry about going to find them later.
Mhm.
They don't have to worry about sitting there with their like solo cup and styrofoam,
Right.
just like squeaking their way through feast, which is still better than nothing.
Yes.
I will point out. So excellent. Love that. Does anyone else have anything else about what we're doing? So I'm gonna look through the comments really quickly, the chat. Missing
have
tent
something.
gnome, very cool. Go ahead.
Did have something that we, during our reign, we've made the decision to move all of our language and our laws to non-gender specific. So that's like an actually super huge undertaking that I didn't realize that it was. So we spent time doing that. And based on this conversation, I'm curious if any kingdoms have moved from their award recommendations to actually stating preferred pronouns on the award recommendation as well. Has any kingdoms moved to that?
Some have. On Stewart, I believe is either that was the intent of the DEI officer in that kingdom, or maybe he succeeded by this point, because I know that that was something that he said the structure already allowed for. So that was something he was exploring. Many kingdoms also have the option of putting in the title with it or having like a little extra note. That is a great note. Also, in several kingdoms, DEI officers are doing the tackling local language to remove that gender exclusive language. I know in my kingdom we had a couple, like for some weird reason it was called out specifically that the prince would be male and the princess would be female.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't called out for the king and queen. It was very strange. But that sort of thing, just there's no reason.
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea a lot. It is probably beyond the scope of your average event steward, but if that is an area in which you have any influence, definitely push for it because it is part of making us more inclusive overall.
Good, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, inclusive event leadership team helps because you know something is a problem before the event. Yes, it is so much easier to be preventative rather than reactionary. It will be crazy usually on the day of, and you will not have the bandwidth to suddenly deal with a million issues. So it is tremendously useful to be able to address that ahead of time. Very good. Lots of outside space, but little inside. They did gate car side. Very beneficial. People don't even need to get out. I love that. Can we do that more? Is that a thing? Should run more.
Yeah, it was really cool. They actually had clipboards and they would have people come up to the car and you could fill out everything on the clipboard and take care of everything with gate without even getting out of the car.
Love that. That's awesome. Add into our courts traditions stated by the heralds. Fantastic. Because like I said, I'm glad I got the note of like he's gonna smack the crap out of him because indeed he did. Indeed. Previous Middle Kingdom sign herald. Yes, you can reach out to Lady Elizabeth. Why do I struggle with that so much? If you have any questions or if you just want more resources. I did not know about Ethelmark Sign a Day, but that is apparently a great group to learn SCA specific sign. Feast gear kit for each of our shires. Fantastic, Mandy. Killing it. And John, yes, Corpora did do that recently. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, if I can, real quick. I apologize. I have a camera on order for the last 4 weeks for my main PC, so heaven help everybody, you may be able to see me next time. But yeah, that's also being done in the Marshal's handbook. Everything from groin protection to gender neutral for everything. And we hope to maybe at some point get all of the corporate side documents done. Thank you.
And that was John, who's the president of the SCA right now. So that's useful info. And that's why Avocall followed. Yes, fantastic. I mean, it is always to our benefit to be as inclusive as possible. So I'm gonna wrap up the last two little sections, and then We are well ahead of schedule, so we will have time for general questions or anything else that people kind of want to talk about, throw in, spitball. Whatever we talk about, like I said, it's a living class. So I'm going to keep adding these suggestions back in. So let's talk about feast really quickly. Publish your feast information ahead of time. You can note common allergies and sensitivities, but publish that full recipe ahead of time. People can have some really unique but incredibly debilitating reactions to food. And you don't want that to be the fun surprise that interrupts your feast, and they don't want that to be the fun surprise that ends them up in the hospital. So, publish your information. And then, and I really cannot stress this enough, stick to your menu. If you published a recipe and said there will be no onions in this recipe, and then the day of you're like, it lacks a certain je ne sais quoi, add the onions, you could really hurt people. Don't do that, okay? Stick to your menu.
May I provide a weird example?
Yes.
We had a member who was living temporarily here from New Zealand. And in New Zealand, they sweeten things differently. So she didn't realize that pineapple juice would be used in random things and had a terrible allergic reaction because that's not what they use over there.
Yep. And there's a million things, especially when you're doing more period recipes. So there are people who are like, why is there sugar in the eggs? It's a thing. It helps to give people the information to evaluate that ahead of time. So publish it, stick with it. For the fourth time today, that in a surprise to no one, I'm putting together a class on this. We'll discuss some strategies for dishes that will serve well across different dietary restrictions, and we'll talk about some strategies for prepping food safely. I'm working with a couple different cooking laurels on this, so it will be prepared, and we will place it before you for consumption. Look at all those food puns. Anyway, contact info for your feast steward. If you put it on your website and make sure it's easily accessible, people can reach out in advance and kind of figure out what they can eat, what they can't eat. Now, I do encourage people to be as inclusive as possible when they're planning a menu, but it will not be possible to account for every dietary restriction. There's a lot of them. So while you can do what you can do, another option is making sure that you have off-board seating available where people can bring their own food in and they can still be a part of the entertainment and the camaraderie of feast without necessarily having to worry about whether or not they're going to end up in the hospital or the bathroom for the rest of the night. So off-board seating is a great way of being inclusive and still keeping people and not making a crazy amount of work for yourself or for your feast steward. All right, so the last bit is some examples that are currently happening. And what's really cool is that when I made these examples, it was probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I already have 10 more. So people are really running with different ideas. It's very cool. We're doing a lot. I know that some of this information can sound a little bit overwhelming because I just gave you 100 different things. Totally valid. But like I said, you don't need to do all of them to be taking steps towards inclusivity. Anything helps. It does. We're not going to let perfection be the enemy of better, right? We're going to do the best that we can with the resources we have. So you can see on these examples, we talk about a quiet space or a quiet room, low sensory area. We talked a little bit about that. There is a Baron out in Ontario that debuted this kneeling pillow where it's a little stool, so you can kneel on it and it's a little pillow, and then if you need to, you can flip it over and it's a little stool for people to sit on. And they just have it with them so that when they are having courts, people have that option. It was tested to hold up to 600 pounds of weight. There is a credit for the design and construction. The name is on the sheet. Very cool. I've seen that done now in a couple different places. It's very, very cool. Sometimes they'll have handholds on it for easier getting up and down. It's just a very cool thing to have on hand. Last year, Sport of Kings used a lot of different strategies to make things inclusive, right? They had a dedicated accessibility staff position. They had a charging station for medical devices. They had these respite benches set up at regular intervals throughout the site. They labeled flags with heraldic words and not just colors. So if you're a person who is dealing with some sort of visual impairment or color blindness, and someone is like, you just go to the green list, well, which list is that? So actually putting some kind of symbol or design on there was great for them. They released a whole post. They talked about how they did it. It was probably 10 or 15 different things. None of these things by themselves would have been any lesser if they had been done individually, right? If you had only been able to do one of them, it still would have been really cool. They did 10 or 15 because they had that bandwidth and they had those resources. But again, you don't need to do everything at once. Anything you can do is a good thing. I really do want to underline making your life easier by putting the staff in place for success. Get the staff positions if you need them. Keep these people informed and up to date. Interface with them regularly. If you are a person who's just assisting with an event, maybe suggest it. It'll make things easier for everyone. So that's that. Again, I kind of want to open things up. Anyone who has any questions can just chime in, raise their hand, share their thoughts, and then we'll maybe look through chat and see if anyone had any other thoughts, opinions, further. Yes, onions would be unfortunate. Apparently onions are a really common one for everyone. Artemisia added pronouns to award racks. Awesome. Artemisia also has a DEI officer. Her name is Talisha. She's wonderful. Awesome. Publish the menu recipe. I will eat. I don't have the bandwidth to chase someone down. Yes. Keep in mind that for many people, having to constantly reach out and constantly, I mean, if you're a person with dietary restrictions, you are probably doing this all the time. You are reaching out to restaurants. You are reaching out to everyone. If you can make people's lives easier by just publishing things and then marking them like, hey, if I know that this recipe is gluten-free, I'm just going to have a little note that says, hey, this is gluten-free, by the way. That gives people the option of just making the choice for themselves. Running into sites that must have it catered and will not allow offboard. That is hard. Site venue availability is really, really difficult, and sites are starting to be a lot more restrictive, not only on what they allow, but also on like what we can afford. So there are limited options for sites. And sometimes there's just not a way around that. If they don't allow you to bring in outside food, then you can't do the offboard, and that's just unfortunate. I think being upfront about that, most people will understand if you just say, hey, this is a thing we really like to do, but here's why we can't. And then trying to maybe open things up as far as other areas in which you can be inclusive. So again, you do what you can. You can't always cover everything. All right, so that seems like it for chat. Again, does anyone have any questions to wrap up with? Yes, if that's a hand.
I do. Do you have, like, your handout is fantastic, by the way. Thank you so much for that. Is there a way, like I'm an AVACAL, and we are just kind of starting to we're the baby kingdom, trying to, incorporate all the cool new things. And do we have a version where it's like a checklist that I can use to send to our event stewards, or that we can have published on our website that people can pull down? Because we're kind of broadly spread out, so it can be difficult. We're over 3 different provinces, so not always the same people will be running events.
So I don't have a specific checklist, just because it can, I mean, if I if I narrow down everything between the handout and what I've talked about, it would be like 15 pages. But I would love to work a little bit more with someone in your kingdom to talk about what might be more applicable for you. Something that I'm trying to do is ensure that if kingdoms are interested, they have the resources to create a DEI officer or deputy of their own. And that gives me a person to interface with directly who I can teach the information from my classes so that they can go out and adapt them for their own use, for what matters for their kingdom. So if you want to interface with me a little bit more, maybe we can talk about what that would look like for Avocall and then just move on from there. Because I think in the kingdoms that have it now, we have 10 kingdoms that have DEI, deputies to the seneschal or officers, and they've all been tremendously successful in being able to kind of bring info on newer policies and classes and talk to their kingdom, find out what their kingdom needs, and then we can see it reflected at the corporate level. So that would be something that I would love to chat with you more on if you want to shoot me an email.
Yeah, sounds great. I can do that.
Very cool. Thank you. And my email's on here. It's equity@sca.org. Very easy to remember. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you for coming. It was really good. Have a great night. Let me know if you have questions. Bye.
Thank you.